Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Razam Pereira. The Trump administration has said that it is confident that the toughest ever sanctions against Iran, which came into force on Monday, will have the intended effect of altering the Iranian regime's behavior, even as it dodged a question on whether the US has firm commitments from India and China to stop all oil purchases from Tehran within 6 months. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze Washington's latest sanctions on Iran. Joining me on the program today are Ashok Sajanhar, former ambassador, KP Nair, strategic analyst, Sreeram Chaulia, Dean, Jindal School of International Affairs. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Professor, the waiver is only for 180 days. What happens after that?
I think, Frank, they are saying that they will continue to push for zero. But if we look back even at the Obama administration period, 2011 to 15, when they had been doing this incrementally, it ultimately yielded in a deal, which was the JCPOA of 2015. So Trump has, by the way, occasionally, although he's generally very antagonistic to Iran, and all his staff members have been saying we want regime change, we want overthrow, we want democracy in Iran, and we will not tolerate their quote-unquote malign activities. Nonetheless, they have held out some kind of a prospect for negotiation. And it's very tantalizing, behind the scenes, sometimes you hear that the Iranian president says that the Americans wanted to meet me when I go there for the UN General Assembly to New York. And the Americans let out that, the Iranians wanted to meet us. So behind the scenes, there should be some kind of a workaround so that it doesn't lead to zero. And that's my expectation over the next 6 months. Meanwhile, the Iranians, of course, with the backs to the wall, their crude output, despite these waivers for India and 7 other countries, still their output is declining in anticipation of the sanctions. And there are other sanctions as well, financial, on shipping, on insurance. If you take all those together, Iran is under tremendous pressure. And they will be looking to the Europeans who have still got some faith in somehow sustaining the nuclear deal. The Europeans are trying to construct a special purpose vehicle, they say, through which they can continue to finance Iranian oil purchases. They will be looking to all the big Asian giants for solidarity and support, like they did last time during Obama's pressure period. So I think the Iranians will want to bargain better. But one thing is clear, Frank, is that the Trump administration is very hawkish overall on Iran. And because of the Israel factor, because of the closeness of Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, all these countries in the region want, maximum pressure on Iran. So I think what will happen is they will continue to dangle this threat and meanwhile try and get Iran to, quote-unquote, reduce its interventionist behavior in the region, in the Middle East.
Right.
But I think
so overall, that's the bigger game.
That's the bigger game because they are saying, they are already now dominating Iraq. They have taken over Syria. The Iranians are controlling part of Lebanon. They are on the border with Israel on the Golan Heights. And this Shiite arc, as many of the Sunni monarchies in the region fear, is spreading. That's how they project Iran as a diabolical and expanding villain. But I think from our point of view in India, we don't see that at all. In fact, we have to also look at not just oil purchases, Frank, for our audiences. Chabahar port, we are investing heavily in that. And we have tried to convince the United States, saying, look, last year, in the last several months, we have shipped 1.1 million tons of wheat to Afghanistan via Chabahar. The stability of Afghanistan, which is facing drought, severe war, and Taliban takeover, depends on India-Iran cooperation. And if the United States wants Afghanistan to be stabilized, they cannot, use this Damocles' sword and say, any moment we will slap sanctions on you. So I think what is happening is the stability of Afghanistan is also part of this mix, not just of the broader Middle East. So in a way, it's a complex interaction of economic and geopolitical factors. For now, we have relief. But in the long run, as the Iranian behavior and the American threats, it's like a dialectic between these two. We have to make sure that our interests are protected. We have to look at diversification also. I mean, despite Iran being important, there is Venezuela, there is Nigeria, there is Saudi, there is Iraq. These are the other big suppliers to India. Likewise, for other like China and for Japan, South Korea, all of us have to look out for our own interests, but at the same time be sure that we will not be rolled over by these threats. And I think we have stood our ground and we should be proud of that fact against the US.
All right. Professor, where does this leave Iran and what next for Tehran really?
I think, Frank, they are going to look back to their own history. And already the official discourse is that we have always suffered. You know, the Shias, they have had this martyrdom, and being an oppressed sect within Islam has been there. And, you know, the sacrifices of Hassan and Hussein, and they keep referring to these, iconic figures. And at the same time, Ayatollah Khamenei has from time to time talked about the need for strategic flexibility and for tactical peace with your enemies and those kind of things. They will be looking at both sides. On one side, as I said, they will try to build up a kind of a resistance front, as they call it. They have Hezbollah in Lebanon. They have Hamas. They have got Islamic Jihad in the Palestinian territories. They have got now all these popular mobilization fronts in Iraq. Wherever essentially there is a Shia community. Iran has presence in, they have got Houthi rebels in Yemen now. So they have got bargaining chips, and they will be looking to try and moderate, turn off the tap on one of these groups or reduce their activities or their funding in return for some concessions. That's the nature of the Iranian state. It's a contradictory. On one hand, they're very paranoid about the West and about Western neocolonialism and imperialism. On the other hand, they're also looking. So I think a bargain is possible. But on the other hand, the domestic, if you see the domestic situation, the deprivation is quite high, and all the hopes of created by Obama in 2015 have been dashed. So I think there's also a problem of long-term credibility of the United States. I mean, here is a country that went into a multilateral, plurilateral agreement with 5 other countries with Iran, and now it is unilaterally backing out of it. So what is that message conveying? I mean, who would want to do a deal with the US in this kind of situation? So the Iranians, it in a way becomes an example. I very much doubt if North Korea will, ever actually do any kind of a full settlement with the US in the terms of complete verifiable disarmament and denuclearization. It's because of this, and the Iranians at some point, they have an atomic base, they have a system that can be turned back on.
Right.
And ultimately, that will be their bargaining chip. That's what they're saying. If you ruin this deal that was signed through a lot of give and take, and if you keep on doing applying this maximum pressure, show no flexibility, then eventually our centrifuges will turn on. And then remember what will be the regional ripple effects. So the Saudis will say we cannot trust on the Americans fully, and we have to go for our own bomb. Turkey will try and do the same. Egypt could try and do the same. So it will be a proliferation, spiral.
Right.
And the Iranians will always dangle that threat as part of their sophisticated negotiation strategy. So I don't think they're going to back out of this, but definitely they will be giving hints of where they could do a quid pro quo.
Professor, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Frank, recently Benjamin Netanyahu visited Oman. And Oman has been a kind of a back channel between Iran and its enemies. So there has been a lot of speculation as to, are the Israelis also looking for some kind of a settlement with the Iranians behind the scenes to tone down this Cold War that has, boiled into this economic warfare in the form of sanctions and all. Qatar is another country that's sympathetic to Iran. Turkey, of course, is there, and so is Russia. So we should be, I think India, we want to preserve this umbilical cord with Iran from being totally cut. It's very incumbent upon us that we also consult these facilitators and intermediaries who could eventually help and resolve this crisis. The last time Obama wanted to reach out to Iran, it was Oman that did it. And we have very strong relations with a country like Oman in the Persian Gulf, which has always played a neutral role and is not necessarily pro or anti-Iran. So we need to build those coalitions to be able to ride out this storm.
All right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.